By the end of the Harry Potter story, the fighting is over, but the family lines are only just beginning. In this video, we're mapping every major future family tree and following what actually happens to those lives once Hogwarts is behind them. Let's start with the boy who lived. Although, per this video, we should probably call him the man who got busy. Wink, wink. Harry Potter's life after the war does not slow down. It consolidates power. He joins the Auror office immediately after the Battle of Hogwarts, working under Kingsley Shacklebolt as the Ministry tries to rebuild itself into something less corrupt than before. Alongside Ron Weasley, Harry helps modernize the Auror department, stripping out old practices that had failed during Voldemort's rise. By the time his children are at Hogwarts, Harry is no longer just catching dark wizards. He becomes head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, effectively overseeing magical policing across Britain. He spends less time at home than he would like. This becomes relevant later. Ginny Weasley's post-war path goes in the opposite direction. She does not enter government. Instead, she becomes a professional Quidditch player, joining the Holyhead Harpies as a chaser. After ditching the snitch, she moves into journalism, eventually becoming editor of the Daily Prophet's sports section. In other words, one parent enforces the law, the other controls the narrative. A healthy household dynamic. Somehow, between police work and sports stardom, Harry and Ginny find the time to have 3 children. James Sirius Potter is the eldest and most boring Potter offspring. By the time of the Deathly Hallows epilogue, he is already at Hogwarts. He is sorted into Gryffindor, yawn, and behaves exactly as expected. James is loud and confident and enjoys tormenting his younger siblings, especially baby brother Albus. Canon material presents him as a spiritual successor to James Potter and Sirius Black combined, hence the name, with none of the subtlety and all of the confidence. He appears publicly at the Quidditch World Cup and is treated as part of Wizarding Society's inner circle from an early age. No official material describes his adult career, relationships, or children, but his personality is clearly established early. Popular, mischievous, and completely comfortable with his surname. Albus Severus Potter is the middle child and the emotional center of the next generation. He begins Hogwarts in 2017 and immediately diverges from expectations. On the train, instead of bonding with Rose Granger-Weasley as planned, he befriends fellow misfit Scorpius Malfoy. At the sorting ceremony, Albus is placed into Slytherin, ending the Potter-Gryffindor streak in front of the entire school. This decision defines his early Hogwarts years. He struggles under the weight of his father's legacy, faces bullying for his house placement, and grows increasingly distant from Harry, who does not understand him particularly well. During his 4th year, Albus becomes involved in a time travel plot after overhearing Harry refuse to help Amos Diggory. With Scorpius Malfoy and a girl named Delphi, he attempts to change the past using a stolen time turner. Before you can say, "Holy multiverse, Batman!" their actions fracture reality into multiple alternate timelines, including one where Voldemort wins the war and Harry dies. In that altered world, Scorpius is forced to fix history almost alone. Eventually, Delphi is revealed to be Voldemort's secret daughter with Bellatrix Lestrange, and the original timeline is restored. Just the idea of Voldemort having a child with anyone, let alone playing hide the wand with Bellatrix Lestrange, is so foul you should be angry that I just put the picture in your head. The experience forces Harry and Albus to confront their fractured relationship and begin repairing it. When this arc ends, Albus is still a student. No future career or family details are provided beyond this point. Lily Luna Potter is the youngest. In the epilogue, she is still pre-Hogwarts and openly jealous of her brothers. Later material confirms she is eventually sorted into Gryffindor. She appears briefly in Cursed Child-related material, but does not receive a narrative arc. Her role is simple and deliberate. She represents the continuation of the Potter name without the burden placed on Albus. As of all official material, Harry and Ginny have no confirmed grandchildren. Their family tree currently ends with their 3 children, all of whom are positioned very differently within the wizarding world they inherit. Ron Weasley's post-war life begins alongside Harry's, but it does not stay there for long. Immediately after the war, Ron joins the Auror office, working with Harry during the Ministry's early reform period. After roughly 2 years, he leaves law enforcement entirely.
And your mother! And you're all a bunch of pigs!
Ron's exit is not framed as failure or burnout. It is practical. Practical jokes, that is. He joins George Weasley at Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, helping turn the joke shop into one of the most profitable businesses in Diagon Alley. Ron becomes wealthy without ever holding real authority. which suits him perfectly. Hermione Granger moves in the opposite direction. She enters the ministry at the lowest professional level, working in the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures. From there, she systematically rewrites outdated legislation while continuing the work she started with SPEW, Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare, by improving the living conditions of house elves and other sentient non-humans. She later transfers into the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, where she dismantles the remaining pro-pureblood laws from within. By the mid-20s, she had worked her way up to deputy head of the department. By the time of Cursed Child, she has become Minister for Magic. Unlike Harry, Hermione never leaves the system, but rebuilds it and runs it like the bossy know-it-all she is. Between all of Hermione's gatekeeping, girl-bossing, and gaslighting, and Ron's gags, grins, and guffaws, the couple manages to produce 2 children. Rose Granger-Weasley is the elder. She starts Hogwarts in 2017, the same year as Albus Potter and Scorpius Malfoy. She is sorted into Gryffindor and immediately establishes herself as high-achieving, competitive, and socially strategic, much like her mother. On the Hogwarts Express, she attempts to plan her friendships in advance, clearly assuming that she and Albus will move through school together. When Albus chooses Scorpius instead, Rose drops him like a bad habit. Academically, she mirrors Hermione. In her second year, she joins the Gryffindor Quidditch team as a chaser and is introduced by McGonagall as your superb new chaser, which is Hogwarts shorthand for she's already terrifying. During the events of Cursed Child, she remains judgmental, driven, and largely unimpressed by Scorpius, despite his obvious crush on her. Hugo Granger-Weasley is the younger child. He appears in the Deathly Hallows epilogue, and later at the Quidditch World Cup, where Rita Skeeter notes his resemblance to Hermione. Beyond that, he's effectively a blank slate. No Hogwarts house, personality traits, or future paths are defined. We don't even know if he inherits the Weasleys' signature ginger hair, or even if he has hair at all for that matter. This makes him the least documented member of the immediate Weasley-Granger line, which is impressive considering his parents. Ron and Hermione have no confirmed grandchildren. Their family line currently stops with Rose and Hugo, one child already positioned for influence, and the other left entirely undefined, which, in wizarding terms, just means J.K. Rowling hasn't pulled his story out of her butt for a tweet yet. Arthur and Molly Weasley's legacy does not come from political power or dramatic destiny. It comes from volume. When you breed like rabbits, your bloodline is bound to spread. By the post-war period, their family becomes the single most widespread bloodline in modern wizarding Britain. This is not speculation. By the time of the Deathly Hallows epilogue and the Quidditch World Cup coverage, their grandchildren are already scattered across Hogwarts, Diagon Alley, and the Ministry's future talent pool. Bill Weasley and Fleur Delacour form the first major branch. They have 3 children, Victoire, Dominique, and Louis Weasley. Victoire is the oldest, born on the anniversary of the Battle of Hogwarts. By the time of the Quidditch World Cup, she is publicly involved with Teddy Lupin, to the visible discomfort of several adults and the visible delight of Rita Skeeter. Dominique and Louis are younger and largely unexamined, but their existence firmly establishes the Delacour-Weasley line as socially prominent and well-connected. Charlie Weasley never marries and never has children. He continues working with dragons abroad, which means this branch of the Weasley line simply ends with him. Given Charlie's personality, this appears intentional rather than tragic. Rumor has it there might be a half-human, half-dragon child out there with bright red hair, but I'm sure that's completely unrelated to why Charlie never married. Percy Weasley marries a woman named Audrey. Together, they have 2 daughters, Molly Weasley II and Lucy Weasley. Percy returns fully to ministry life after the war and rises steadily through the ranks. While his daughters are named, their school lives and careers are not described, which fits Percy's general trajectory. Stable, respectable, and quietly bureaucratic. George Weasley marries Angelina Johnson, his and Fred's former Gryffindor Quidditch teammate. They have 2 children, Fred Weasley II, named after George's deceased twin, and Roxanne Weasley, not named after George's deceased twin. George continues running Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, with Ron later joining him. The business becomes a major commercial success, turning the family's chaotic humor into sustained economic power. With Harry and Ginny's and Ron and Hermione's kids in the picture, Arthur and Molly have at least a dozen confirmed grandchildren. By the next generation, the Weasley name is embedded in nearly every major social structure of the wizarding world, from commerce to education to government. Like I said, rabbits. The Malfoy family survives the war, but it does not emerge unchanged. Draco Malfoy marries Astoria Greengrass after Hogwarts. Astoria comes from a pure-blood family, but rejects the ideology that once defined the Malfoy name. She carries a blood malediction, a hereditary curse that resurfaces in her generation, leaving her physically frail and shortening her life. Draco initially fears having children because pregnancy could worsen her condition. Astoria insists anyway. Not for legacy or blood status, but simply because she wants a family. That, and I'm sure living alone with Draco Malfoy, can't be very fun. They have one son, Scorpius Hyperion Malfoy. Scorpius Hyperion? What, was megalomaniacal supervillain Malfoy already taken? Astoria raises Scorpius deliberately differently from how Draco was raised. She teaches him tolerance towards muggles and rejects pureblood superiority, a stance that causes tension with Lucius and Narcissa Malfoy. Family gatherings are described as uncomfortable at best and more awkward than Thanksgiving with your MAGA uncle and liberal cousins at worst. Astoria dies in the summer before Scorpius' third year at Hogwarts, leaving Draco to raise their son alone. Draco's later life is quieter than expected. He remains independently wealthy and largely withdrawn from public power. In Cursed Child, he is no longer driven by ideology or ambition. His defining concern is Scorpius. Regret replaces arrogance. Silence replaces posturing. Scorpius begins Hogwarts in 2017, the same year as Albus Potter and Rose Granger-Weasley. He is sorted into Slytherin alongside Albus. Almost immediately, rumors spread that Scorpius is secretly Voldemort's son, based on fabricated time travel conspiracies linked to his birth year and, the fact he was born without a nose. The result is severe bullying and social isolation. Unlike his father, Scorpius responds with humor, intelligence, and restraint. He becomes Albus Potter's closest friend, effectively dismantling the Potter-Malfoy feud. When Albus decides to alter the past using a stolen time turner, Scorpius follows him into the plan. After their first interference with history, Scorpius returns alone to an alternate reality where Voldemort won the war and Harry died. In that timeline, Scorpius is celebrated as a dark figure, while Draco holds power. Scorpius rejects it entirely, and works with alternate versions of Snape, Ron, and Hermione to restore the original timeline. When history is repaired, Scorpius chooses to re-engage with school life. He considers joining the Slytherin Quidditch team. He awkwardly asks Rose Granger-Weasley out. He begins, cautiously, to exist rather than endure. As of all official material, the Malfoy line ends with Scorpius. No children, no further descendants, and no extension beyond him are described. The family survives, but its future is deliberately unresolved. As we know, Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks did not get a long future together. They don't even make it out of the last book alive. But they do get a child. Their son, Edward Remus, or Teddy Lupin, was born shortly before the Battle of Hogwarts. Teddy is left orphaned before he is old enough to remember his parents. This makes him one of the few next-generation characters whose life is shaped entirely by the aftermath of the war, rather than the war itself. Teddy is raised by his grandmother, Andromeda Tonks. Unlike Neville Longbottom's isolated childhood, Teddy grows up surrounded by support. Harry Potter becomes his godfather, and the Weasley and Potter families function as an extended safety net. He grows up in homes where grief is understood and not avoided. This matters later. Like his mother, Teddy is a metamorph magus, able to change his appearance at will. Unlike his father, he is not a werewolf. His magical inheritance skips the curse and keeps the gift, which is about as kind as wizarding genetics ever gets. At Hogwarts, Teddy is sorted into Hufflepuff. In his final year, he becomes head boy, which doesn't mean what you think it does, sicko. Get your head out of the gutter. Rowling later notes that Teddy, as head boy, is mildly disappointed when James Sirius Potter is sorted into Gryffindor rather than Hufflepuff, establishing him as an older, slightly exasperated mentor figure to Harry's children rather than a distant legend. By the time of the Deathly Hallows epilogue, Teddy is 19 and a frequent presence in the Potter household. James casually reports seeing him snogging Victoire on the Hogwarts Express platform. This relationship continues openly and publicly. At the Quidditch World Cup, Teddy and Victoire Weasley are inseparable, to the visible irritation of Rita Skeeter and the resigned acceptance of everyone else. The relationship quietly links two war-scarred families together, the orphaned son of fallen heroes and the eldest child of Bill and Fleur Weasley. No marriage or children are described, but the pairing is treated as long-term and stable. Beyond this, Teddy's adult career is not specified. He exists less as a future profession and more as a connective figure, binding together the Lupin, Tonks, Potter, and Weasley legacies into a single extended family that carried the emotional memory of the war forward. Neville Longbottom survives the war and finally becomes who he was always supposed to be, a grade A hunk. Rawr. After Hogwarts, Neville marries Hannah Abbott, a fellow member of Dumbledore's army. Hannah does not pursue power or prestige. She becomes the landlady of the Leaky Cauldron, placing her at the literal crossroads of Wizarding Britain. Neville lives with her in the rooms above the pub, which is about as symbolically neat as the story ever gets. Neville's professional life stabilizes quickly. He returns to Hogwarts as the herbology professor, a role that fits him perfectly. By the time Harry's children attend school, Neville is an established member of the staff, teaching the next generation rather than shaping policy or cutting off giant snakeheads. In Cursed Child, characters refer to him simply as Professor Longbottom, which is the clearest possible signal that he has fully stepped into adulthood and authority. Hannah later retrains as a healer, with references suggesting she applies for the position of Hogwarts matron. Whether she ever formally takes the role is not detailed, but the intent is clear. Both halves of the marriage orient themselves around care, education, and maintenance rather than ambition. Unlike many other post-war couples, Neville and Hannah's family tree does not extend downward. No children are mentioned. Their legacy is not genetic, it is institutional. Neville helps rebuild Hogwarts not as a battlefield or a refuge, but as a functioning school again. He teaches the children of Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Ginny. He becomes part of the structure that ensures the next generation does not grow up the way his own did. Their line ends quietly, which feels appropriate. Neville Longbottom does not pass on a dynasty. He passes on stability. Luna Lovegood does not settle into wizarding society. She expands it. After the war, Luna becomes a magi-zoologist, traveling the world to study magical creatures that most witches and wizards either dismiss or actively avoid. This is not treated as a hobby. Luna gains a professional reputation as a serious naturalist, publishing findings and discovering previously unrecorded species. In short, she turns being odd into being correct. She marries Rolf Scamander, a fellow magi-zoologist and the grandson of Newt Scamander, the wizard famous for writing about fantastic beasts and where you can find them. The pairing links Luna directly to the Fantastic Beasts lineage without changing her personality or trajectory. Their marriage is based on shared work rather than domestic stability, and their family life reflects that. Luna and Rolf have twin sons, Lorne Michaels and Lysol Scamander. Lorcan and Lysander Scamander. By the time of the Quidditch World Cup, the twins are old enough to be left at home with Xenophilius Lovegood. Rita Skeeter, predictably, implies that this is because the children are too disturbed to be seen in public, which confirms very little except that they exist, are not infants, and are already being judged by association. No official material describes which houses Lorcan and Lysander are sorted into, what subjects they excel at, or whether they resemble their mother's eccentricity or their father's uncanny resemblance to Eddie Redmayne. What is clear is their position in the wider family map. Through Luna, they are loosely connected to the Potter-Weasley network. Through Rolf, they inherit the Scamander legacy of exploration and documentation rather than governance or fame. This branch of the family tree grows sideways rather than upward. It does not produce ministers, aurors, or war heroes. It produces observers. Given the state of the wizarding world, that may be the more useful role. Some post-war figures do not build families, but they still shape the environment every future family grows up inside. Cho Chang survives both her borderline problematic name and the Second Wizarding War and quietly exits the center of wizarding society. She later marries a Muggle, stepping away from the insular patterns that defined earlier pureblood and half-blood family trees. No children or professional details are attached to her later life. Her role in the future wizarding world is indirect, but significant. She represents a generation that chooses integration over legacy, and does so without ceremony. Kingsley Shacklebolt, nothing borderline about this one, becomes Minister for Magic after the war. His leadership marks the first genuine institutional reset the ministry ever experiences. He oversees the reform of the Auror Office, recruiting Harry, Ron, and Hermione into their positions, and dismantles structures that allowed Voldemort's rise in the first place. Namely, by getting rid of the giant sign in front of the ministry that reads, "Evil supervillain hellbent on exterminating muggles wanted. No noses or hair required." No family, partner, or descendants are mentioned. If you want to understand why these future families end up the way they do, you have to go backwards, not forwards. Every rivalry, marriage, alliance, and dead-end line traces straight back to choices made decades earlier. By pure-blood dynasties, forgotten houses, and families already collapsing long before Harry was born. So next, we're rewinding the entire map. Every family tree in Harry Potter explained.